Hey guys, EckhartsLadder here, talking about something today that I think is important to most of us, and that's the upcoming Star Wars movie. Now, some of you who are new to my channel might only know me from my top 5 lists or my Star Wars head-to-head videos, but I do try to do a few different things, and one of the things I do is talk about Star Wars news and Star Wars leaks. So if you don't like this kind of content, that's completely fine. You don't have to watch this video. There'll be something for you either later this weekend or on Monday. So, I think probably the biggest complaint that many Star Wars fans had with The Force Awakens was that it was too much like A New Hope. It was a copy or it was derivative, was what many people claimed. And I'm not going to get into that this video, but these concerns have kind of boiled over into The Last Jedi. And that all came kind of to a boiling point a few days ago when a Star Wars fan tweeted at Rian Johnson, basically saying that everyone is worried that Episode 8 will be too much like Episode 5. And for those who don't know, Rian Johnson is the director of The Last Jedi, and the guy says, any chance you could address these concerns in a meaningful way without dismissing the issue? Ryan says, how? I've addressed it in the only way I possibly can, by spending the past 3 years of my life making a film I do not think is derivative. So I'm going to take a look at this issue from my point of view, and I'm going to look at a few things. I'm going to look at some of the things we've seen in the trailers, some of the things that have been leaked, just basically how stories are told generally, and then at the end I'm going to give my opinion on whether I think the story will be derivative or not. And I will just say at one point I am going to be talking about Star Wars leaks, and there will be some spoilers there. I'll let you guys know when that's going to happen, so if you don't want to watch it, you can turn off. Alright, so let's look at this issue. And first of all, I just want to say that I think Ryan and the Star Wars team have kind of brought this issue on themselves, kind of, at least through how they've marketed the movie so far, and that's really through the first trailer. And there were a couple things in the first trailer which they're basically just asking for the comparison. The first is the speeders flying across a white planet towards these walkers. Now, I'm sure the circumstances once we actually watch the movie will be completely different, but of course it evokes imagery of The Empire Strikes Back with the Battle of Hoth. The trailer also really focuses on Luke training Rey, and of course in The Empire Strikes Back, Luke's becoming of a Jedi under the tutelage of Master Yoda was probably the main plot point of the movie. But I mean, training with a master and undergoing trials is a pretty standard part of a hero's journey, so I'm not really sure if that's fair to call that derivative of The Empire Strikes Back. That's just kind of storytelling in general. I mean, there are other comparisons, especially with some of the newer characters, of course. One is that Captain Phasma is a cool person in a suit of armor who doesn't really say much. People say that that's kind of the new trilogy's version of Boba Fett. And Benicio del Toro's character of DJ kind of seems to be some sort of underworldy, kind of slimy gangster, and that, of course, some people make the comparison to Lando in Empire Strikes Back. People also highlight the state of the universe in the new movie, with the First Order really seeming to be in a position of power, and that they're going to be on the hunt for the Resistance, perhaps the New Republic. They kind of make that comparison to The Empire Strikes Back as well, where the Empire is really in a position of power, even though they have just kind of had a big defeat with the destruction of the Death Star. But again, that's kind of standard storytelling structure. You know, you start off with an engaging introduction, you meet your heroes, they probably have one battle, but then in the next movie, the middle part, if it's just one movie, there's some sort of conflict, and maybe the heroes get beaten once, or, some major threat emerges, which of course is then resolved in the final movie of the trilogy. So these are both middle parts of a trilogy. They both will have very similar functions. So just because we see maybe the bad guys come out on top, or we see a new enemy emerge, doesn't necessarily mean that it's derivative of a previous Star Wars movie. It's kind of just following standard storytelling structure. But Star Wars has always employed this kind of storytelling, and they've always brought these old mythological tropes. George Lucas himself said that Star Wars is kind of like a modern day fairy tale, and that the structure of Star Wars was meant to bring mythology into modern filmmaking. So I'm not necessarily sure it's fair to call the film derivative because it follows classic storytelling motifs. I'm going to get into the leaks in just a second so we can really look at the meat and bones of this movie, but before we do, I just want to briefly talk about The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens was, at least in my mind, meant to get Star Wars fans who were turned off by the prequels back into the series. In doing so, they got a director and a writer in J.J. Abrams who is skilled and who has previously rebooted series. So they got these fans back on board by making a movie that can perhaps be seen as derivative of the original trilogy. Now, I don't necessarily want to get into a big argument on this point, but I don't think The Last Jedi necessarily has to do the same thing, and I don't think that Rian Johnson is the same kind of director. And everything he's been involved in, from episodes of Breaking Bad to movies like Looper, has been very original. Alright, so I'm just going to canvas a few plot points now, and most of these come from the website makingstarwars.net, and they've proved to be extremely reliable when it comes to leaking information. So I'm going to just pick a few out that seem to me to either be, indicating that the movie will be more like Empire Strikes Back, or the opposite. So if you don't want to be spoiled, you should probably stop now, and I'll give you just a minute to leave. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about is the role of the Resistance in this movie, and of course, they can be compared to the Rebel Alliance, but where the Empire Strikes Back kind of focused on the Rebel Alliance for the first little bit of the movie with the Battle of Hoth, and then the heroes all kind of do their own thing, this movie seems to be more focused on the Rebel Alliance throughout. So it seems like they spend some time on the grassy planet that we see in episode 7, D'Qar, and then they leave for some sort of spaceship, some sort of, command ship. While this is going on, it seems like there's a second fleet, which is led by Laura Dern's new character, Admiral Holdo. There will be a space battle of some sort, and then it seems like some of the main characters will go on a mission for the Resistance. This does seem different than The Empire Strikes Back, where the characters are pretty much the entire time just running from the Empire. I kind of want to also talk about Canto Bight, which seems to be, as Rian Johnson describes it, a playground for rich assholes, and this doesn't sound entirely dissimilar from Cloud City. However, while the setting seems similar, I'm not really sure if the story being told there will be. It seems like Finn and the new character Rose are on that planet to somehow try to infiltrate the First Order. It seems like they'll be meeting the character of DJ, who again, as I said, kind of seems to be some sort of gray character with unclear motivations, again, not dissimilar from Lando. This is kind of a different kind of story, even with the similarities. It's not they're trying to run away and hide from the Empire, they're trying to somehow strike against the First Order. This now brings us to Snoke's Star Destroyer, which is supposed to be just as big or larger than the Executor. And of course, Episode 5 introduced that ship and Super Star Destroyers in general, so the comparison can be made, but I don't think it's really surprising that the sequel introduces a new and bigger ship. I think that should just be expected, and as long as the ship's not used in the same way, I don't think fans will necessarily complain too much and it won't really bother me. Apparently Finn and Rose go undercover on this ship, and I'm not sure exactly what they're trying to do. Some sources said that they're trying to blow it up, I'm not really positive. But it seems like the Super Star Destroyer in this movie will be less of a symbol like it was in The Empire Strikes Back, and more of an actual plot point. Alright, now let's talk about Crate, and unlike the Battle of Hoth, this actually seems to be in the third act of the movie. We don't really know a whole lot about what's going on, other than that at one point the Resistance had some sort of mining base on the planet where they got minerals and used that to finance their operations. Now I think the good guys will actually be on the offensive here, rather than the Battle of Hoth, of course, where they get slaughtered pretty much by the Empire. Some leaked LEGO sets have also suggested that Luke and Rey might be present at this battle, which would be pretty cool because at this point in the movie they'd both be at their full power. However, it is hard to ignore the similarities, especially where the new walkers look very, very similar to the AT-ATs. So other than that, it seems like Luke and Leia probably won't spend too much time together, probably won't go on an adventure together, and that there are two distinct storylines, one being Rey's training with Luke and the other being Finn, Poe, and the rest of the Resistance doing whatever mission they're doing. I didn't really talk about Rey's training in this video because really I don't think it will be at all similar to what Luke goes through on Dagobah. There's rumors of Rey fighting sea monsters, of Luke not being the perfect trainer like Yoda was, and even a confrontation with Kylo Ren and the Knights of Ren at some point on Acto. Alright, so what does this mean? Is Episode 8 gonna be a copy of Episode 5? Well, I don't think it will quite reach the levels of, say, originality that, Attack of the Clones did. On the other hand, I personally don't think that this movie is going to be derivative to the point where it'll actually take away from the movie watching experience. I think I can actually say that without even looking at the plot points, and it all comes down to what I talked about earlier. JJ was meant to get fans back on board with the new franchise. Now Episode 8, they can kind of do their own thing and make their own story. And while these plot points, especially the ones that have been in the trailer, do kind of show a similarity and at least ideas to what happened in Episode 5, I think the execution will be different. One thing I think is that this is going to tell a much bigger story. We're going to see a much larger conflict, we're going to see organizations rather than just people, and we're going to see things happening on a galactic scale. I will say though, they have kept the plot of this movie pretty tight, especially when compared with Episode 7. At this point, before that movie came out, we already knew pretty much the entire plot. While we do know a lot of the bones and we know some of the major sequences and scenes, we don't really know a lot of the overarching story, what happens to the main characters. There's still a lot of mystery, which really makes me excited. I have high hopes for this movie, and I do think that it is going to be its own distinct experience. But let me know what you think, and if you've got this far, I want you to answer the following question. How has the internet changed your feelings towards the sequel trilogy? Did you feel great after Episode 7 came out, then you got home and read some things that made you feel less good, or perhaps the opposite? And how do you think Star Wars fans have really treated, J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson, everyone involved with the new Star Wars franchise? Finally, are you worried about the new movie being too similar to Episode 5? And how did this video change your perception of the similarities? Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. As always, may the Force be with you.